In Splatoon 3, we have a total of 6 Salmon Run stages. 3 of them are ports from the previous game, and 3 are completely new ones. I've spoken about Salmon Run maps in the past, but we now have a few more maps. So in this video, I will put all the Salmon Run stages we currently have into a tier list, and I will explain my reasoning for their placements. And as usual, this is just my opinion. Some of these maps can be pretty controversial, so it's totally fine to disagree, like whatever you want. Let's start off with C tier. In here we only have one map, and it's everyone's most hated Splatoon 2 port, Mariner's Bay. While I do really like the ship concept and think it makes the map have a unique look, it's also its biggest problem. The ship itself is very narrow and restrictive, meaning that the bosses and lessers take up a ton of space and it's very hard to lure without getting stuck at the basket. And the left and right sides are a death pit even with those elevators. They're hard to use when you're getting chased, and you'll often bring lessers with you and get splatted anyway. Not luring also isn't great because even with the egg throws, it can be tough to bring the eggs to the basket to meet the quota, especially if people aren't paying attention to it. High tide is even worse. You can't even choose to lure or not, because if you do, you'll overwhelm the basket area and it's an insta loss, and if you don't, then the eggs will get stuck at the end and it'll be very hard to retrieve them. I will give credit where it's due though. Low tide is pretty good. It's not revolutionary or anything, but it's cool. To me, the problem with Mariner's Bay is how unfun it is. I love hard maps only when they're fun, and this one just isn't. It's a struggle the whole way through, and winning doesn't even feel like an accomplishment. This stage only feels better when everyone on the team knows exactly how to play it. If you enjoy Mariner's Bay, then good. I truly respect it. But for me, it deserves the lowest spot in this video because it's unfun, it's overly complicated, and it clearly wasn't made for Splatoon 3. So that's why it's in C tier. Moving on to B tier, we have another infamous map, Spawning Grounds. This one is another port from Splatoon 2, and it doesn't have anything that really stands out outside of a pretty big part of the map being just grates. And don't worry, we'll get to those in a second. It doesn't really have anything that is the cause of every difficulty on the map like the ship on Bay. I'd say it's more of a collection of small things that make it really tough. The first problem is those grates that I mentioned. They become practically unusable on high tide, making the map very small and cramped since pretty much half of it can't be used. Those grates are such a big problem because they heavily limit mobility since you can't swim, and it makes it easier for salmonids to hit you. And since you can't go in ink, you also can't refill your ink tank as fast. It's a bit easier to go on grates if you're a lightweight weapon, but for any other weapon, it's pretty much always a death sentence. Normal tide is definitely better since you can avoid the grates, but you need to be very careful with lessers and getting overwhelmed since mid is so small. Another thing is that the shore boss spawns are brutal. A lot of the stinger and flyfish spots are really hard to access, and that's the cause for a lot of crew wipes. But Spawning Grounds can actually be really fun if you're with people who know the map very well. It's just that it has a couple difficulties that make it pretty tough if you're not used to it or if you're newer to Salmon Run. For me, Spawning Grounds is in B tier. Mid is very small, the shore boss spawns are rough, and those grates are pretty bad. But I admit that it can be a very fun stage if everyone on the team has pretty good knowledge of the mode and its fundamentals. Now we have our most populated tier, A tier. The first one here is Salmonid Smokeyard, our most recent and third port from Splatoon 2. This stage has a very unique layout with moving platforms that transport you from one major part of the map to the other. The area around the basket is very small, so you really need to stay on top of things. And that's something that's been making this map quite the struggle in freelance. But there are still some things that can help you out. Like there's a ton of inkable walls that can help you with mobility, you can use those platforms to go onto the other side of the map if it's safer, and there are a lot of really good spots to throw eggs from one side to the other, which is always really practical. Even if it's small and has its difficulties, Salmonid Smokeyard is a fun stage with an interesting layout, and those platforms make it unique and more complex. And that's why I decided to put it in A tier. Our next map in this tier is Sockeye Station. Now this map is very good, but it can become a bit boring. I think it's an amazing map for beginners to introduce them to Salmon Run. It's by far the easiest one, it has a lot of space to move around and to keep yourself safe in tough situations. You have the tower that's fantastic high ground, and the basket is up on a ledge, so salmonids have to go around to get you, giving you ample time to kill them before they can damage you. too. Even on low tide, you can safely go for shore bosses from the sides. This stage was made to be easy on purpose to make new players learn the mode without having to worry too much about navigating a hard map. And that's great, but it's pretty much all there is to it, and it becomes a bit boring once you get better and want to start getting challenged. So Sockeye Station is an A tier for being a solid map that unfortunately becomes a bit boring with experience due to its lack of difficulty and simple layout. And finally, for this tier, we have Jam and Salmon Junction. Now this is actually my favorite Salmon Run map, but there are some things that can make it really tough for some people. It's a very long but narrow map that requires some luring, and the shore bosses can be rough if things aren't under control. High tide is also incredibly small, so you really need to know how to multitask and take out multiple bosses in quick succession. Boss priorities can also differ. For example, Steel Eel is usually a medium priority boss, but here it takes up a ton of space and you have to be really careful when luring it on normal tide, and on high tide it's better to just spawn camp it. But Jam and Salmon Junction is a very unique map. The height gives a lot of interesting options for positioning, the way it's played feels different from the other stages we have, and I also really like its layout. It steps out of the usual square or roundish maps we're used to. But even if I find it very enjoyable, it's an A tier because it can be quite hard. I think it's super unique and I love the difficulty, but I can definitely see it being a bit of a struggle for some people. And finally, we have S tier with Gone Fishin' Hydroplant. This stage is very geometrical and blocky with elevated platforms all around the basket and a ton of inkable walls. Those platforms are great to see where bosses are coming from, to get high ground, and for mobility as well. You will spend a lot of time on those platforms since the basket area is small and can be pretty dangerous. The rest of the map isn't as small, even if it does have a couple narrow paths, especially around the basket. This map really wants you to deal with lesser salmonids because those are usually the biggest threat here. They take up a lot of space, blocking the path to the basket, and they put salmonid ink everywhere, making it hard to survive and move around the different parts of the map. Gone Fishin' Hydroplant feels like it's not too hard but not too easy either. Anyone can play on it and still have a good time. It's also great to solidify certain skills and make you adopt good habits like painting the walls and ground, dealing with lesser salmonids, using the map's terrain to your advantage for survivability and good positioning, and more. It has no big issues that I can think of. Maybe low tide is a bit of a mess sometimes with that one lane. Other than that, I think this map is intelligently made and very much deserves its spot in S tier. And that was my tier list for all the
Salmon Run
maps we currently have in Splatoon 3. I know some of these are controversial, but hopefully I gave enough justification for you to understand my reasoning with the placements. As I said, Junction is my favorite, but I couldn't justify giving it the top spot when it has so many difficulties that make it hard for beginners and people in lower ranks. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your favorite Salmon Run stage in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye!